Hello and welcome to One Trek Mind. I'm Michael.
And I'm Raptor.
And today we're going to be discussing our favorite number ones throughout the variety of different Star Trek shows. There are a couple that haven't made this list simply because they were only number one for a very, very short amount of time, or they technically weren't the, second in command of the ship, but in all other ways have sort of taken on that role. And in one case, we've actually put someone on this list who, by all rights, isn't a number one or in Starfleet, I don't believe, but deserves to be on this list regardless.
If you're talking about who I think you're talking about, not till later on in the show's runtime, please.
I think we're discussing the same person. They wear a Starfleet uniform at one point, but I think it's like the last two episodes or something. But we'll get to that. We'll get to them.
Yes, and we'll start at the bottom of our lists and work our way up. And I think would be good to sort of just clarify what we're judging them on, because I've kind of judged them on how they are as a first officer in itself as part of the job, but also a little bit of like how they were used in the show as well, because I think that's how we did it for the captains. So
yep, that's pretty much how I've ranked mine. Not necessarily like how much I like the character or if they're considered one of my favorite characters, but more, how well written are they? How good of a commander are they? How well do they complement their captain? Basically, how Starfleet would judge them, essentially.
Shall I go first, since you did the intro?
Yes, you go ahead and start with your number 10.
So at the very bottom of my list is Jack Ransom from Lower Decks, with a bit of an asterisk next to him. I'll explain the asterisk in a second. Throughout Lower Decks, he's a bit of a douchebag, especially towards Mariner, like deliberately tries to set her up to fail, is the sort of person you would never want to work for, that you would be very hard pressed to try to respect. He's just overall, like, I've seen him described on the official wiki as Commander Riker on speed, which I do kind of
a bad way to put it.
Agree with. But, and here's the asterisk, he's a character in an animated comedy show which exaggerates everything to the nth degree. Every character is an exaggerated personality type, and the show itself doesn't take it or Star Trek 100% seriously. He's principally bottom here because I can't really judge him against the more serious commanding officers. I cannot put an animated comedy show character like that, I can't really judge them against more serious shows. So that's principally why he's bottom of the list. He's here because I kind of can't really judge him.
Well, he is also at the bottom of my list, but I disagree that he should be asterisks. Because, it's clear that the show is exaggerated, but when they did the crossover with Boimler and Mariner, even though they were slightly subdued from their cartoon counterparts, they were still very much the same characters and behaved the same way. So I feel like you could safely assume that Ransom does genuinely act like this, and the actions he takes are pretty cut and dry. Like, again, he very nearly gets his crewman killed because he's trying to teach Mariner a stupid little lesson and is just wildly incompetent most of the time. Also turned into like a giant god head at one point and almost tried to kill his crew, but I don't really put that against him. It wasn't exactly his fault, and there have been plenty of situations where crewmen have been like possessed by some sort of otherworldly entity and did some terrible things.
What is it Janeway says? Weird is part of the job.
Mr. Kim, we're Starfleet officers. Weird is part of the job.
Weird is definitely part of the job. But I do find him funny.
Oh yeah, he makes me laugh. The show makes me laugh quite often.
He's just too much of an asshole for me. Doesn't take his job seriously enough, is more interested in hitting on every woman he can see and gets his crew into too much danger. So, bottom of the list for me. My number 9 is actually going to be 7 of 9 from Star Trek Picard. You see what I did there?
Yes, I did, and she's also my number 9. So go ahead. What's Why is she down here? Because I think a lot of the fan base really loved the way that she was portrayed in season 3, especially.
I didn't. I didn't hate it, but for one, there's not a lot to go off of here. It's one season. For almost half the season, she's not even number 1. She's been like relieved of duty and isn't acting as the first officer. So there's just not a whole lot to go off of when it comes to her being a first officer. And what we do see of her, at least right off the bat, is her disobeying orders in a fairly large way with her captain, which, as much as I disliked him as well, it was still a pretty big breach of protocol there. But later on in the season, when you do see her have to take command after a certain event that happens that I don't want to spoil in case someone hasn't actually seen the whole season, she actually does rather well. She convinces crewmen who have never, been on the bridge or done these crazy life or death scenarios to actually step up and take on the responsibility and do it rather well. So I see lots of potential, but again, there's just not a whole lot to go off of. She was very, very briefly seen acting as first officer in that season. It's really only the second half of the season, and only in like the final 2 episodes, I would say, does she do a very, very good job.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you've said about her. Partially for me, she's down here. Not more for how she acts in her job, but more for the way that she has been written and used. I feel that 7 of 9 has kind of undergone a bit of a character assassination for Picard. I feel that they tried to turn her into some wannabe Han Solo or Ripley type, and then when they hadn't had success with Picard season 1 and 2, they twisted her into this first officer who lets herself be pushed around by Captain Shaw and even dead-named by him.
We could make up the time.
Hansen, your loyalty lies with this ship. Not to old friends, former ex-Borg.
It's really clear she does not want to be called Annika Hansen, but Shaw is, still using it, and there's even a point later on in the season where she corrects him about what her name is. I feel like the character that we saw in Voyager who regained her humanity was not willing to be pushed around.
And if I want to stay longer?
You will not be accommodated.
Had found a family and everything else. I just don't think Star Trek Picard did a very good job with her character, and I don't think season 3 really saved her that much for me. As a first officer, I just think she lets herself be pushed around way too much.
I would mostly agree. On one hand, you kind of have to a degree, follow what your captain wants, but I also don't think she would have put up with that much shit constantly.
Definitely not.
Moving on to number 8.
Yes, next for me, number 8 is Commander Saru from Discovery.
Oh, okay.
While I find him interesting as a character in terms of his alien race and the backstory to that alien race, that that they're all basically these sort of, that Saru's race has extra sensory perceptions that make them very powerful predators, and the other race that they share the planet with basically put them down in order to stop that. Everything that Discovery went into with Saru, I think that's very interesting as a character and as an alien race. But again, that suffers because Discovery never really, I felt, took advantage of that and did very much because of the lack of the ensemble cast that we've spoken about before. And I also feel that Saru also really only came into his own after he was promoted to captain and then promoted to ambassador. In season 1 and 2, I put down here, he feels a little wet. He just does his job with Captain Lorca. He just does what he's expected to do. He never really stands out that much for me as a first officer. And then when Captain Pike comes on board, he's just like, there's the ship, carry on. I feel like he was a bit underutilized. But I don't necessarily blame him for that. I think it's the writing, primarily, which I blame for that.
I have for my number 8, Commander Chakotay.
Interesting. Chuckles!
I appreciate that he challenges his captain, but I think he challenges his captain way, way too much. There's almost never a decision that Janeway can make that he doesn't really, really push back on to the point of almost being insubordinate.
We'd be helping the Borg assimilate yet another species just to get ourselves back home. It's wrong!
Tell that to Harry, Kim. He's barely alive thanks to that species.
I find him as a character to be rather dull, and his backstory never really grabbed me. Has an extremely rushed arc. What could have been rather interesting with him being a former, enemy to Starfleet, now joining the crew, it just gets kind of brushed over really, really fast. I think it's one episode where you have that conflict present, and then he's just Janeway's right-hand man.
I'll destroy this ship before I turn any part of it over to the Kazon. So that's how the Maquis would do it,
Who constantly questions every decision that she makes forever. That never changes. And I also feel like he just had a strange trajectory. It always seemed clear that he was developing at least somewhat romantic feelings for Captain Janeway, but then at the last minute ends up getting with 7 of 9, and it was just weird. I found his whole character arc and story to be rather boring and strange, so he just never really did it for me. And it's not helped by the fact that the actor really disliked a lot of the show that he was on, and to me it came across in a pretty big way, so he's fairly low on my list.
So who's your number 7?
My number 7 would be formerly Captain Rayner. I thought he had a rather good arc. It's a little bit on the short side for me, considering it's only one season that you get this arc for him. Is very initially unlikable, but does get to a point where I actually did find him to be a rather likable character. It just took a minute to get there, which I can appreciate. But again, there's just not really a whole lot to go on. Didn't have very much screen time at all, was only there for about a season. And I feel like his backstory is basically a copy-paste of Kira's, which I found to be a decent backstory, but I thought it was more decent when I heard it the first time. An alright character, a decent number 1, who does finally question Captain Burnham's decisions at least a little bit, which I think she sorely needed, but just wasn't quite there for me. Just didn't have enough time to get any higher on this list.
So interestingly, my number 7 is Commander Chakotay, for very much similar reasons as yourself. I feel he's a character who suffered from bad writing quite a bit. He was written as this marquee freedom fighter from a native Indian planet, and then once the show began, he fell too quickly in line with Janeway, which I feel was a big problem. That the whole marquee aspect of the show completely flopped on. It was they had this great idea of bringing the marquee crew with the Starfleet crew, and
did nothing with it.
Chakotay seems to be full-on Starfleet officer far too easily and quickly. Yes, he does go up against Janeway, but the ways that he does it are always really annoying to me. It's either here's some Native American Indian story I have to parrot out, which is something I absolutely despise about Voyager, is this whole the native Indian stuff coming through Chakotay is just here's a story from my tribe. It's always really cringy, I felt.
There's a story I heard as a child, a parable. A scorpion was walking along the bank of a river. Suddenly he saw a fox. He asked the fox to take him on his back across the river.
I mean, it was basically his one character trait, which I found annoying. It's like when a gay character's only character trait is that they're gay. It's does he talk or do anything else besides that? I wouldn't have disliked having the Native American culture talked about and shown, but that's all he would talk about when it came to his personal self. And it's is there anything else to your character?
We talk to animals. It's a Native American tradition.
Only ever when it suited a major story bit as well. Like, we had to use this spirit thing to get B'Elanna's soul back. We can't use it just as, you know, a nice character moment or something. It's only ever useful and necessary when it serves the plot. Yeah, I put him slightly higher than Saru though, because when he is pressured to take command or directly get involved in a situation, he does kind of feel like he has a bit more authority to him. And while I think it was wrong of him to go against Janeway's position when the whole Species 8472 Borg war thing is ongoing and Janeway gets injured and tells Chakotay stick with the plan, and he very quickly goes against it when he learns that the Borg started the war in the first place. I did kind of like that, because it shows him sticking to the, that ideal of we shouldn't be doing this. And I do, in that specific situation, given that it's the Borg, arguably I think there is some benefit to his position. I liked that he was capable of having his own mind at times, which is why I put him above Saru. And then interestingly enough, my number 6 was then Captain Commander Rayner.
We're sticking pretty close together here.
We were pretty close. A bit like Captain Jellicoe when he shows up in Next Generation. Rayner is very by the books, very stern, very you can't be friends with your crew, very closed off, very blunt, kind of rude, but he does go on a genuine arc in that final season of Discovery from bastard to less of a bastard.
Yeah.
He gains the respect of the crew around him. It's almost a bit of a shame that they did this for the last season. Kind of wish it had been done for like a season before, so there could have been more of that continuation of him perhaps lowering those sort of defensive shields of his a bit. I agree with your comment that his backstory is way too much like Kira's. That's probably the only criticism I really have about that. But yeah, I think he was just an average sort of commander.
Yeah.
His ability to tell Captain Burnham the what the hell do you think you're doing? At last, someone actually said it to her. We were both, when he actually called her out on it, we were both like, about time.
You can't go on every away mission, Captain Burnham.
Yeah, so he gets a point for that off the bat.
My number 6 spot goes to Commander Chin-Riley.
Ooh.
I found her to be quite motherly, but very stern with like rules and regulations. She's a very collected person, but ultimately, again, just doesn't have as much screen time for me to go off of just yet. It's only been 2 seasons, and since that show does actually focus on so many different characters, she's only had like a very small handful of episodes that are specifically devoted to her. I do find her backstory to be quite compelling though. I think her court case episode was probably my favorite episode in all of Strange New Worlds thus far.
We performed our rituals only in secret. We knew if we were ever found to be genetically augmented, we would be arrested.
And I enjoy, even though it's a character that looks and essentially is human, that we do have an alien race as one of the commanding officers. And there's even that really nice scene where her lawyer friend actually tells everyone, like, I'm happy to know that this crew is proud to have an Illyrian serving as first officer, which I thought was really nice. It's really just the issue of not quite enough screen time just yet. I have to see just a little bit more for me to put her any higher than this, but from what I have seen, I think she's a great first officer thus far. Doesn't really question her captain's commands all that much, but to be fair, Captain Pike seems to have a pretty good handle on most situations. He hasn't really made any decisions that I feel warrant calling into question too strongly. Maybe with the exception of some Prime Directive breaks where I feel like more people probably should be like, hey, that's kind of against the rules, but I will let that slide a little bit.
And your number 5?
What's your number 6?
Rayner.
That was your number 6?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so it was. For my number 5, I have Commander Saru.
Wow, way higher than mine.
I really like Saru as a first officer. I think he's very cautious, very logical, very diplomatic. But my biggest criticism of him is perhaps a bit too much so. As you said, he doesn't push back against his captain enough, and there are a lot of moments where he kind of just wants to roll over that I don't think make for the greatest leadership qualities. But ultimately, as first officer, he does his job very, very well. He doesn't push back at the wrong moments the way I feel like Chakotay or some of the people lower on this list will do. And he has gotten a pretty decent amount of screen time for me to judge him as a first officer and as a captain. And ultimately, I think there are a lot of situations, especially on that show, where they really should have listened to him and taken the more cautious approach to things rather than go in guns blazing like they normally do. So I found him to be a very good first officer, or at least, middle of the road for me. He's right in the middle of my list.
So the one in the middle of my list, and this is probably going to be where the hate comes, is Spock. He's a good first officer, very supportive to Kirk, always comes in with the ideas, has a nice tete-a-tete with Bones. Unfortunately, I just find him too perfect and kind of bland. I find Spock more interesting in the movies, or at least the first 2 movies, where he's acting up a bit and isn't so... He seems to have his own mind a little bit more in those first 2 films. Spock in the TV show, I kind of almost see him as a literal, Deus Ex Machina machine for Kirk. It's like whenever Kirk is in a difficult spot or the ship's in a difficult spot, Mr. Spock comes up with the specific idea or mind meld or nerve pinch or something else. And I get it. That's not a fault of necessarily the writing or the character. It's how it was at the time. It's a sign of the times. It's how shows were. I just think that since him, we've had far better first officers and characters. So he's just in the middle for me because he was the first. He set a standard, but I think some people have done much better, and obviously some have been worse. So he is stuck here as number 5 for me. I'm gonna get hate for that in the comments, I know.
Yeah, I probably will too, because he's my number 4. Again, I think he's good. He's in my upper half. He's very reliable. He's very calm under, stressful situations, as most Vulcans are.
Commodore, I do not wish to place you under arrest.
You wouldn't dare.
He is the original mold for first officers. They are kind of based off of what he brought to the table to begin with, so I think that does deserve recognition. And he's a good counter to Kirk, because Kirk is very emotional and hot-headed and everything, whereas Spock is able to level him out just a little bit, which I think is good to have your first officer sort of be a counter to the captain. But like you, I find him to be a tidbit boring. He's just a little too perfect a lot of the times.
A little too Vulcan.
Yeah, and again, I mostly boil that down to him being the original mold to the first officer. They're still kind of working out the kinks of what a Vulcan is and what a Vulcan does, and really trying to establish that they don't go off book ever. But as a result, I've never found him to be the most compelling of characters. Don't get me wrong, I like him. He's a very good first officer, but he'll never be my favorite by any means.
My number 4 is Una.
Much higher than mine.
I find her very supportive, but has her own attitude and her own mind and her own style. That much was obvious from the very first moment we saw her with Captain Pike in Discovery, and she's maintained that through Strange New Worlds.
I'm not feeling it. I felt it when you shot me with a phaser.
She does have the distinction of being the only Illyrian in Starfleet and fought for her right to be there in the fleet, and we know that's important, at least as far as Boimler and Lower Decks is concerned, but I think it shows the newer Star Treks, perhaps growing up a little away from this whole idea of genetic engineering is always wrong and always done for the wrong reasons. I think something both me and you thought, especially you, I know you have your quite strong opinions about genetic engineering and whether it's and Star Trek's way it handles it.
Yeah.
I think it is one of the ways that the legacy shows are very dated. So, I'm glad of that. She's slightly higher than Spock for me because she's just more interesting and a more enjoyable character. And I am hoping we get to see a lot more of her taking command and taking control and just getting stuck in a bit more, so to say.
Just going off of what you were saying about the genetic engineering, I still just find it really hypocritical of Starfleet to be like, no genetic engineering whatsoever. Because I'm like, but you got rid of all these diseases and all these afflictions on people. How is that not genetic engineering? Like, oh, well, we did it through more traditional medical practices. I'm like, that's still a form of genetic engineering. That's not nature or evolution that got it out of us. We did it to ourselves. So I've never liked the whole no genetic engineering whatsoever, unless it's a very specific kind that we say is okay. It's just very frustrating. But moving on.
Yes, moving on. And our top three, and obviously we have pretty much similar characters left to go here. So
I feel like we'll probably go in the same order as well. I feel like we will. We've always been pretty in tune on these things.
Sure. So number 3 is
T'Pol.
Yes.
I think she has a fantastic arc over the course of the show, going from very combative and not wanting to meld with the crew at all. She's basically just a Vulcan spy at the very start, and then ends up becoming very ingrained with the crew, actually develops a relationship with Trip. She's very level-headed and logical, like most Vulcans are, which I think is a very useful quality in a leader. And especially when your captain is Captain Archer, like, you really gotta put him in his place sometimes.
Once you rationalize the first misstep, it's easy to fall into a pattern of behavior. I can't justify this course of action.
We don't have a choice.
I won't let you do it!
Usually has the best plans for situations. Again, there are so many situations where Captain Archer, other characters are like, we're gonna do this. And I'm sitting there thinking, I can already think of about 10 ways that could go horribly wrong. Please don't do that. And T'Pol is like, no, how about we do this instead? Which is, like, objectively the better way to do it. And just has some really interesting, like, quirks and beats to the character. Is over-sexualized to a point that does bother me. Don't get me wrong, I've never really liked that about the character, but that's not the character's fault. That's, again, the showrunners and the writing of making it so. But I really, really liked her addiction storyline, showing a Vulcan character actually have a major flaw that they need to overcome, which, again, made her a whole lot less of a deus ex machina than Spock pretty much ever was. And the whole region of space that they were in was extremely dangerous to her during that Xindi arc because of that, I don't remember what the material is called.
Trillium D.
Yes, and it can quite literally make Vulcans go utterly insane, turn them into zombies essentially. So there were a lot less situations where she was the saving grace for the crew, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I'm very much the same when it comes to T'Pol. I think she's the superior Vulcan first officer to Spock, not because she's more competent. I think she's equally as competent, but I find her more interesting and she has more flaws. She's also in a very unusual time. She's countering the human bigotry that's all around her, but at the same time as standing up for herself. She also multiple times stands up for humanity and Starfleet, not just, for her crew and, ultimately saving officers and saving lives and everything else, but stands up for humanity and Starfleet against her own people, the Vulcan High Command. She's a bit like Worf in that respect, I find, that she's constantly balancing the needs of her Vulcan side with the fact that she is developing as a member of the ship's crew.
What about the Vulcan listening post that Captain Archer found there? But learning from one's mistakes is hardly exclusive to humans.
and she struggles on through that, and she develops very good relationships with Captain Archer and with Trip, her and Phlox as well, because they're the only aliens on board, so they have quite a good in the first few seasons. T'Pol and Phlox are often used to philosophically debate something that's going on in the episode. And then the addiction storyline was really good, essentially becoming addicted to having emotions and being able to experience emotion, and then obviously having the clone child with Trip and having a really horrible, tragic end to that whole situation. And yes, I also agree with you, over-sexualized by the writers, which is the only criticism I have for her character.
Pretty much the same. Now,
this is the big one.
Yeah.
This is the big one.
I'll let you say your number 2 first. I'll let you know if mine is the same.
I really, really struggled with this, and I'm still not 100%. I've got Commander Riker.
Me too, me too.
Thank God for that. Okay, so Commander Riker is a true first officer in every descriptor for me. He's supportive of his captain, but also of his crew. He steps in and takes over when necessary, or when pushed. He puts himself in the line of fire multiple times.
To protect his captain, which is sort of the point of your first officer.
But also, when the ship is boarded by the Remans in Nemesis, Riker goes off and again almost dies. But he's also more of a character. He's a fountain of wisdom for people around him, whether that is the occasional alien crew member that comes on board, or whether that's Wesley, or whether that's LaForge or Data, or even Picard in some instances. He's
loves playing his trumpet.
And we know lots about what he likes to do when he's not just a commander. We know that he likes jazz, and he plays the trombone, and he loves poker. We know things about him that are not just related to his job, which I think pretty much for every crew member that we've had lower than this, apart from perhaps Saru and Chakotay. Who the hell knows what they like when they're not doing their job, because we never find out.
Yeah, there are some on the list here that you get little tidbits of oh, they like to do this, they like to do that. I like how Saru, it's
botany.
Yeah, he loves messing with his plants and everything, which I thought was a nice little character trait. But for most of them, there's not a whole lot, or there's only one thing. Riker, a lot of different things about. You also know that man is horny, and he just absolutely loves hooking up with a lot of different aliens and a lot of different people, which has always been a fun quality of him. I honestly, I really appreciate how positive he is when it comes to all that.
I actually learned something about him that I never knew until I watched it the other day.
What?
So, the whole Riker maneuver, the way that he sits down on chairs.
Oh, yeah.
It's because he has a back injury.
Oh, really?
So he has to kind of do it like that, because he can't do it normally.
I mean, hey, it's always been a funny little quirk of his characters, so...
It has. Even Boimler knows. I love the fact that, members of Starfleet are aware of doing a Riker, because Boimler
Wesley does it when he's trying to emulate Riker. But yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I think he's extremely loyal, challenges his captain when necessary, but supports him when necessary, is a very approachable commander. People don't seem to have any issues or reservations about going up to him about personal or professional matters.
A Betazoid woman, when she goes through this phase, quadruples her sex drive.
Or more.
Or more. Never told me that.
And he's just a really reliable dude. You can count on Riker.
So by
process of elimination...
Thank you. I couldn't remember... By the process of elimination, Kira is our number 1. I find it interesting that we both have technically a non-member of Starfleet.
I was going to say, I almost didn't put her at the top because for technically
hang on.
all
Is this the one you were going on about at the start?
Yes, this is who I was going on about.
Oh, I was thinking of T'Pol, because she's also not technically a member of Starfleet until...
Oh, I guess that is true.
Season 5.
But yeah, no, I was thinking about Kira because I'm I don't know if she ever technically joins Starfleet. I know at the very, very end of the war she wears the uniform, but I don't know if she's actually a part of Starfleet. One, because the Bajorans don't want to be. They make it very clear, you know, we are our own people with our own military and chain of command. We don't want to just merge with you, which I've also always really liked about the Bajorans and her character. They stand pretty firm on that. But I've always found her to be excessively strong-willed, is a very interesting character. Her backstory, which Rayner is a copy-paste of, was, I think, fairly revolutionary for the time, because she, in all essence, was a terrorist. Yeah, like a freedom fighter, one doing it for, you know, quote-unquote the right reasons, but she was a terrorist. She performed terrorist acts and everything.
Your questions about my experience with killing, if you're wondering what it's like. When you take someone's life, you lose a part of your own as well.
Has a great arc, because she starts off kind of like T'Pol, very against Starfleet and against Captain Sisko, who is not a captain at the time.
No, commander at the time.
But eventually becomes, you know, one of his best friends, is very ingrained with every one of the crew, or, you know, quote-unquote crew, because it's not technically a starship show. In most other terms, it still works the same way. You have basically the same group of characters operating the station the same way you kind of would with one of the other shows. And they do go on away missions on the Defiant, where she basically acts as the first officer in those cases as well. And I like her as well because she's so quick-witted and funny. Like, there are so many moments where she is just unbearably hilarious, sometimes without trying to be, sometimes when she is, and I just love her to death. I think she is a fantastic character.
If all your little advertisements aren't purged from our systems, I will come to Quark's, and believe me, I will have fun.
And she's who I would pick to have as my first officer, if I were captain of a ship.
Oh, I was actually going to ask that question at the end. So, yeah, I agree. She nudges out Riker to me because, again, a bit like to Paul, she has to balance her job with also her dedication to Bajoran interests and also the Bajoran religion, because she's in a very difficult position of basically her commanding officer is a major prophet of her faith. And so she has to balance out her faith and religious... I think it's safe to call it religious reverence.
Yeah, she's very religious. She also doesn't hide it or anything. She makes it pretty well known that she is a firm believer in the faith. She
has to balance that out with her job, especially in situations where she's having to work with Sisko directly, such as the episode when the Defiant is caught in the gas giant and Sisko is injured, and she's pretty convinced that Sisko's gonna die on the floor with her.
This can't happen. You can't die. You're the emissary. There's still so much for you to do.
And she kind of goes through a bit of a crisis of sort of faith and first officership there, trying to sort of handle that situation. She forms a wonderful friendship with Dax. She has a wonderful romance with Odo, which I think is one of the better romances we've ever seen in Star Trek between those two.
Agreed.
I also really like the sort of... I say it's a love-hate relationship. It's only a love-hate relationship from Quark. Kira clearly dislikes Quark, but Quark adores her, even though she threatens him all of the time. Like, he obviously really likes her.
If you don't take that hand off my hip, you'll never be able to raise a glass with it again.
Oh, I love a woman in uniform.
And for a Ferengi as well, who, you know, obviously they have a very backwards vision of what women are like. I find it interesting that such a strong-willed, aggressive female, he's like, I'm definitely into this.
Wants what he can have.
But yeah, overall, I just think she's an amazing first officer. And yeah, very, I think, not even just a standout at the time for being a terrorist, but I think even now,
maybe even more
given
so now,
everything,
actually.
That's what I was about to say. Given everything that has happened and is currently going on in the world, she stands out even more. And the way Star Trek handles that in DS9 is even more impressive, considering it was, the early 90s when this was written. And it's still, to this day, very, very good.
I mean, it's very nuanced. It doesn't go out of its way to say, like, oh, she did everything because she had to. She did nothing wrong. It's like, no, she was a terrorist. She did bad things. But she was doing them for a pretty valid reason. It's a complicated situation. There's no real right or wrong to it. It was simply what she did in order to try and get rid of the Cardassian occupation.
As for who would be my chosen first officer, very torn. Like, I love to play poker, so, like, I would probably get along with Riker, but I know as a person that I would probably need someone like Kira or T'Pol if I was a captain to sort of rein me in.
Put you in your place a little bit. Be like, no.
I think out of those top three, I think I'd probably go with T'Pol. Just because I think while Kira can put people in her place, she does do it in a very unprofessional manner.
That's true.
Which works really well. But as the captain of a starship, and this is one of the problems I think Discovery had, you don't, on the bridge of your starship in front of your crew, call out your captain for being wrong or whatever. T'Pol, meanwhile, would see you in your ready room and do it in a professional manner, which I think is slightly better for a good work environment.
Slightly more smug manner, though, I would say. T'Pol definitely had a way of, like, giving you an actual slap to the face with words, which
but I love that. I love that from people. Like, Kira would literally beat you up, whereas T'Pol would just say something and you'd be like, ow!
You said what? To my face?
So yeah, I think it would be T'Pol for me. But I think I would get on great with Riker as well. Just drinking and playing poker.
I mean, I would probably get along with everyone above my number 7 spot on this list. Like, once you get to Una and the rest of them on my list, I'm like, I would be fine with any of them, honestly. Some would just be a little better than others.
Okay, so here's a different question then, since you guessed the question I was going to ask. Who out of this list, if you saw them on your captain of your starship and you saw them on your list of potential first officers, who are you going to be like swiping off
Ransom.
Straight away? Like, no.
Ransom 100%. I'm like, not on my ship. Not on my ship.
You know what's bad? I think for me, it would probably be Spock.
Why? What's wrong with Spock?
He would just piss me off too much. That emotionless blandness that he has. Like, I wouldn't even be able to have a joke with my first officer. The person I'm going to be working with the most is basically a brick wall.
I mean, sometimes that's rather funny, though.
It would just drive me up the wall.
I mean, that just makes me think of Strange New Worlds, where they're like, have you seen a zombie movie? He's like, a zombie? No. A movie? Yes. Like, stuff like that would just crack me up.
I'll tell you something else as well, and I'll probably get hate for this as well, but I don't care. I, as captain, would not permit my fucking chief medical officer and my first officer to bicker with each other as much as they do, especially if it's in front of fucking guests or flipping aliens that I've got on the view screen, and I've got them two behind me bickering away with their tete-a-tete. Bloody hell no. In fact, Mr. Bones, Mr. Doctor, why are you on the bloody bridge at all? Get back to work in your sickbay where you belong, for heaven's sake.
Tell him.
Standing there behind me bickering, one the semi-racist Southern American, the other the slightly racist, boring, bland potato that is a Vulcan. Goodness me, they would drive me bonkers, even though I love the tete-a-tete they have, and it's a great part of what makes the original series. If we're just talking about it strictly from the position of this is also a job, this is a professional work environment, it would drive me mad.
I'm having none of this. You're both getting transferred.
We are not here to have fun.
Do your jobs, damn it.
But yeah, let us know what you guys think in the comments. Who would be your first officer? Or who would be your top 3? I'm curious to see if our top 3s are similar to your guys' top 3s. Do try to keep the comments civil. I know we might have stirred up a few hornet's nests with our lists, but do try to keep them civil.
Just remember, it's all subjective. These are just our opinions. You're more than welcome to have a different one.
I'm sure Chuckles and 7 of 9 have plenty. Was it 7 of 9? 7 of Limes. 7 of Limes have plenty of fans. But yeah, do keep the chat civil in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're new to get more content from us at One Trek Mind. And we will see you in the next video. Until then, it is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.